Ezekiel Carter was old, but he was never broken. At 90, with a scar on his jaw and a cane in his hand, he looked fragile to three corrupt cops swaggering into Carter's diner. They saw nothing but a weary black veteran, someone too brittle to fight back and too forgotten to matter. But Zeke's silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. His past was forged in war and sharpened in secret missions the officers would never survive. When their harassment spilled into violence, they believed they had won. Then Zeke made a single phone call to the Pentagon, and their careers collapsed instantly. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Carter's diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Zeke Carter stood in front of his hallway mirror, his weathered hands smoothing down the olive-green bomber jacket that had been his constant companion for decades. The U.S. flag patch on the sleeve was frayed but proud, just like the man who wore it. His fingers traced the scar along his jaw, a reminder of battles long past. At 90, his movements were measured, but purposeful. He grabbed his cane, more out of wisdom than weakness, and stepped out into the humid southern air. Main Street hadn't changed much in the 50 years since he'd returned from Korea. The same brick buildings, the same sidewalks where some folks still crossed to the other side when they saw him coming. Today was no different. Mrs. Henderson from the post office suddenly found her mail sorting fascinating. Tom Baker from the hardware store ducked into his doorway, pretending to arrange hammers that were already perfectly aligned. Zeke's lips tightened, but he kept walking. The weight of decades of such moments rode heavy on his shoulders, yet his spine remained straight, his chin high. The bell above Carter's diner door chimed as he entered. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon wrapped around him like an old friend. Behind the counter, Aaliyah Johnson looked up with a warm smile that reached her eyes. She was one of the good ones, young, but with an old soul that recognized injustice when she saw it. "Morning, Mr. Carter," she called out, already reaching for his usual coffee cup. "Your booth's waiting for you." He nodded, noticing how her hands trembled slightly as she poured his coffee. She'd been working double shifts lately, trying to keep her younger siblings in school. The system wasn't kind to people like them. Never had been. At the corner booth, Hank Miller sat nursing his own coffee. The retired mechanic's Vietnam War cap sat low over his eyes, but he raised it slightly in acknowledgement as Zeke passed. There was history between them. Not friendship exactly, but the mutual respect of men who'd seen the darker side of serving their country. "Quiet morning," Hank muttered, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of unspoken understanding. Zeke settled into his usual booth, the vinyl seat creaking familiarly beneath him. Through the window, he could see the town hall across the street, its walls adorned with photos of local leaders. The latest renovation had somehow managed to crop out most of the black council members from the display. Small things, always small things that added up to something bigger. The diner was half full, but the space around Zeke remained conspicuously empty. Patterson and her bridge club huddled at their table, their whispers carrying just loud enough for him to hear fragments. "Doesn't know his place," and "causing trouble again." Aaliyah appeared at his table, coffee pot in hand. "The usual, Mr. Carter. We've got fresh biscuits this morning." "Appreciate that, Aaliyah," he replied, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "Your brother doing better in school?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Trying to. Teacher's giving him a hard time again. Says he's disruptive when he asks questions." Zeke's jaw tightened. Some things never changed, just wore different masks. The morning light caught the silver in his close-cropped hair as he reached for his coffee. His hands, though lined with age, were steady. The same hands that had once handled classified documents at the Pentagon, the same hands that had fought in Korea. Now they wrapped around a simple white diner mug, but the strength in them hadn't diminished. A police cruiser pulled up outside, its presence casting a shadow across the diner's front window. The conversations inside dropped to hushed whispers. Aaliyah's shoulders tensed as she retreated behind the counter, her dark eyes fixed on the door. Hank shifted in his seat, his weathered hands curling around his coffee cup. The veteran's instincts, never quite dormant, seemed to spark to life. The bell above the door jangled harshly as 3 officers pushed their way in. Officer Dean Harlow led the pack, his badge gleaming as bright as his cruel smile. Behind him, Officer Mason Trent swaggered in, young and brash, already sneering at the breakfast crowd. Officer Riley Cole brought up the rear, silent but radiating menace, his cold eyes scanning the room like a predator. They spotted Zeke immediately. Dean's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Mason's hand drifted to his belt, fingers drumming near his holster. Riley simply watched, his face a mask of calculated indifference that promised violence. The diner fell silent. Forks stopped midway to mouths. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed to quiet down, as if the kitchen itself was holding its breath. Aaliyah stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot clutched to her chest like a shield. Her eyes met Zeke's for a moment, filled with worry and something else. Anger, maybe, or determination. Hank's chair scraped slightly as he straightened, his presence a quiet statement of solidarity. His fingers wrapped tighter around his coffee cup, knuckles whitening with tension. The 3 officers moved further into the diner, their boots heavy on the linoleum floor. The morning sun caught their badges, throwing sharp reflections across the walls. Dean led them, each step deliberate, like a man who enjoyed making others wait for the pain he was about to deliver. Zeke didn't move. He sat perfectly still, one hand resting on his cane, the other wrapped around his coffee cup. 90 years of life had taught him when to move and when to wait. His eyes, sharp despite his age, watched the officers approach with the calculated patience of a man who had faced worse threats than 3 bullies with badges. The morning peace shattered as Dean planted his hands on Zeke's table, leaning forward with exaggerated interest, his eyes fixed on the frayed flag patch adorning Zeke's bomber jacket. "Well, look what we got here, boys," Dean drawled, his voice carrying across the now silent diner. "Someone's playing dress-up today." He reached out and flicked the patch with his finger. "You get this at the Army surplus store, old-timer?" Mason snickered, shifting his weight to stand closer to Dean. "Nah, probably found it in a dumpster." "That's where his kind usually shops, right?" Zeke remained still, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. His eyes, hard as steel, met Dean's gaze without flinching. The scar along his jaw seemed to deepen as he clenched his teeth. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" Mason continued, emboldened by Zeke's silence. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you forgot how to talk?" He elbowed Riley, seeking approval. "You know how these old folks get? Mine starts to go first." Riley's cold eyes never left Zeke as he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. 90 years old, and still doesn't know when to stay home. Should be in a nursing home, not taking up space here. Around them, the diner had become a theater of averted gazes. Mrs. Patterson suddenly found her eggs fascinating, while her bridge club companions studied their coffee cups as if they held fortune-telling secrets. A young couple by the window whispered urgently to each other, the woman's face pale with anxiety. "You know," Dean said, straightening up and adjusting his belt. "I've been meaning to ask, what's a man your age doing out here anyway? Don't you have some bingo game to lose? Or maybe a nice segregated lunch counter more your style?" Mason's laugh was too loud, too sharp. "Yeah, might be more comfortable there, with your own kind." He emphasized the last words, making them sound like something dirty. Behind the counter, Aaliyah's hands shook so badly she had to set down the coffee pot. Her eyes darted between Zeke and the officers, fear and anger warring on her face. A coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering against the counter but not breaking. The sound drew Dean's attention. He shot her a warning look that promised future trouble before turning back to Zeke. "Your little waitress friend there seems nervous. Wonder why that is?" In his corner, Hank's jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cords. His hand gripped his coffee cup as if he wished it were something more substantial. His Vietnam War cap cast shadows over eyes that had seen this kind of bullying before, in another time, another place. Riley moved slightly, positioning himself to block any clear view from the street windows. It was a subtle movement, but one that spoke volumes about what might come next. His hand rested casually on his holster, a silent threat. "You got a hearing problem, old man?" Dean leaned in closer, his breath hot against Zeke's face. "I said this booth ain't for your kind. There's plenty of other places you can go. Places more appropriate." Mason ran his fingers along the edge of the table, his nails making a scratching sound against the laminate. "Maybe he needs it explained simpler. You know how they are. Need extra help understanding things." Throughout the diner, shoulders hunched, heads bowed lower. The clink of cutlery had stopped entirely. Even the kitchen had gone quiet, the cook peering anxiously through the service window. Zeke sat unmoved, his posture straight despite his 90 years. His hands remained steady, one on his cane, one around his coffee cup. The same hands that had once handled classified Pentagon documents, the same hands that had fought in Korea, now refused to tremble before these badges. "Did you hear what the sergeant said?" Riley's voice carried the chill of a winter grave. "Your presence here is disturbing the peace." A young mother at a nearby table quickly gathered her children, dropping bills on the table as she hurried them toward the door. The bell's cheerful jingle seemed obscene in the tense atmosphere. "Look at that," Dean said, watching the family leave. "You're bad for business, old-timer. Driving away, paying customers with your attitude." He straightened up, adjusting his badge with deliberate slowness. "Move along, before things get unfortunate." Zeke's eyes never wavered. They held decades of dignity, of battles fought both in war and at home. His silence wasn't weakness. It was strength distilled through 90 years of refusing to bend. Aaliyah took a half-step forward, then froze as Riley's cold gaze swung toward her. Hank's coffee cup hit his saucer with a sharp clink, his weathered hands curling into fists beneath the table. Dean's face darkened at Zeke's continued silence. His false smile vanished, replaced by something ugly and raw. "I said—" His hand shot out, fast as a snake striking. "Move!" The coffee cup exploded against the far wall, dark liquid spattering across the pale wallpaper like an angry Jackson Pollock painting. The sound of shattering ceramic echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Dead silence fell. Coffee dripped down the wall in slow rivulets. A single ceramic shard spun on the floor, its motion the only movement in the frozen diner. The shattered pieces of the coffee cup hadn't settled before Zeke spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had faced worse than playground bullies with badges. "Step back, son." The words were soft but carried steel beneath them. "You're making a mistake you won't be able to take back." Dean's face flushed red, anger replacing his cruel amusement. "You threatening me, old man?" His hand shot out, grabbing Zeke's bomber jacket near the collar. The fabric bunched in his fist, stretching the threads of the American flag patch. "Last warning," Zeke said, still calm despite the grip on his jacket. His eyes, sharp as tactical scopes, locked onto Dean's. "Let go!" Dean's response was explosive. He yanked Zeke forward, then slammed him back against the wall. The impact knocked the breath from Zeke's lungs, sent his cane clattering across the diner floor. The sound of wood against tile echoed like distant gunfire. "Not so tough without your stick, are you?" Dean's breath was hot against Zeke's face. Behind him, Mason let out a harsh laugh that held no humor, only anticipation of violence. Riley's cold voice carried across the silent diner. "Break him." Dean needed no further encouragement. His first punch drove into Zeke's ribs, a calculated blow meant to double the old man over. The impact sent sharp pain through Zeke's side, but decades of training didn't fade with age. He shifted his weight, dispersing the force, staying upright. "Still standing?" Mason moved closer, cracking his knuckles. "Let's fix that." Another punch came, this one aimed at Zeke's stomach. He tensed his muscles, absorbed the blow. His breath came shorter now, but his eyes remained clear, focused. The Korean War veteran in him catalogued threats, angles, opportunities. The Delta Force operator measured distances, calculated leverage points. "Look at him trying to act tough," Dean sneered, pulling back for another strike. Time to learn some respect. But something had changed in Zeke's stance. The seemingly frail 90-year-old man had disappeared, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. His feet shifted slightly, finding purchase on the worn diner floor. His hands, weathered by age but steady with purpose, moved with practiced precision. "I gave you a chance," Zeke said, his voice carrying the weight of countless operations, of missions the Pentagon still kept classified. "Remember that." Dean's next punch never landed. Zeke moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of close combat. His hands caught Dean's extended arm, fingers finding pressure points that police academy training never covered. A sharp twist, learned in Korean mountains and perfected in Delta Force training camps. A shift of weight that used Dean's own momentum against him. A precise application of leverage that turned aggression into vulnerability. Dean's feet left the ground. His body arced through the air, badge glinting under fluorescent lights. He sailed over a booth table, scattering salt shakers and napkin holders before crashing onto the seats with a heavy thud that shook the whole row. Gasps erupted throughout the diner. Mrs. Patterson's Bridge Club clutched their pearls in unified shock. The cook's head appeared in the service window, jaw dropped. Aaliyah pressed her hands to her mouth, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fierce satisfaction. Mason took a stumbling step backward, his brash confidence evaporating. Riley's hand moved toward his holster, but uncertainty had replaced his cold calculation. Neither had expected to see their leader tossed like a rag doll by a man old enough to be their grandfather. Dean lay sprawled across the booth, trying to make sense of how he'd gotten there. His face showed the dawning realization that he'd severely underestimated his target. The badge he'd been so proud of moments ago had been knocked askew, hanging crooked on his chest. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered in the stunned silence. Zeke stood straight, despite the pain in his ribs, his bearing more military commander than elderly diner patron. The frayed flag patch that Dean had mocked now seemed to stand out prouder on his jacket, a symbol not of age, but of hard-earned authority. Hank had risen from his seat, his Vietnam veteran's cap pushed back, a grim smile of recognition on his face. He knew what he was seeing, the kind of combat expertise that came from real war, not police academy simulations. The diner had become a tableau of frozen expressions: shock, awe, fear, and, in some faces, a carefully hidden satisfaction at seeing bullies learn a harsh lesson. The coffee still dripped down the wall where Dean had thrown Zeke's cup, but now it seemed to mark the boundary between before and after. Between the world where 3 cops could harass an elderly man with impunity, and the world where that man could demonstrate exactly why such assumptions were dangerous. Mason's mouth opened and closed without sound, his earlier bravado replaced by the uncertain fear of someone watching their worldview crumble. Riley's hand still hovered near his weapon, but his eyes showed calculation. The slow, dawning realization that they had started something they might not be able to finish. From his undignified position in the booth, Dean struggled to sit up, his face a storm cloud of rage and humiliation. His carefully maintained image of authority lay as scattered as the condiments that had gone flying with him. The scene held for a moment. Zeke standing tall despite his years, the three officers stripped of their arrogance, and the diner's patrons bearing witness to a demonstration of why age and appearance were dangerous things to judge by. The moment of stunned silence shattered as Mason recovered his nerve, charging forward with a roar. His fist swung wild, telegraphing his attack like an amateur. Zeke stepped inside the punch, his elbow finding Mason's throat with surgical precision. The younger officer gagged and stumbled backward, clutching his neck. Riley moved next, silent and deadly, aiming a kick at Zeke's knee. But the old soldier read the intent in Riley's stance, pivoting away from the strike. In the same fluid motion, Zeke's leg swept out, catching Riley behind the ankles. The quiet officer hit the floor hard, his badge scraping against linoleum. "Get out! Everyone out!" Aaliyah shouted, herding customers toward the exits. The bridge club ladies abandoned their half-eaten pie, purses clutched to their chests. A young couple knocked over their chairs in their rush to escape. The cook disappeared from the service window, the kitchen door slamming shut. Dean pulled himself from the booth, face twisted with rage. He reached for his belt, drawing his baton with a metallic snap. "You're dead, old man." Zeke grabbed a nearby chair, using it as a shield between himself and Dean. His breath came harder now, each intake sending sharp pain through his ribs. But his movements remained precise. Years of close-quarters combat training took over, muscle memory unchanged by age. Mason had recovered enough to rejoin the fight, circling to Zeke's left while coughing. Riley rolled to his feet, all pretense of procedure abandoned as he drew his own baton. They moved like wolves, trying to surround their prey. "Stand down," Zeke warned, though he knew they wouldn't listen. Pride and rage had replaced any semblance of reason in their eyes. Dean struck first, his baton whistling through the air. Zeke deflected it with the chair, the impact sending vibrations through his arms. Mason lunged from the side, and Zeke had to abandon his makeshift shield to avoid being grabbed. The fight turned brutal. Zeke's elbow found Mason's nose with a crunch, but Riley's baton caught him across the shoulders. He staggered, decades of combat experience warring against the limitations of his 90-year-old body. "Not so tough now!" Dean swung again, the baton catching Zeke's forearm. Pain exploded through the bone, but Zeke turned it into a counterstrike, his fist connecting with Dean's jaw. From across the diner, Hank's gruff voice cut through the chaos. "Leave him alone!" The Vietnam vet moved toward the fight, his own combat training evident in his stance. "Stay back!" Zeke shouted, but Hank was already committed. Riley spun toward the new threat, his pistol appearing in his hand like a magic trick. The barrel caught Hank across the temple with a sickening crack. The older veteran crumpled, blood streaming down his face. The distraction cost Zeke. Mason's boot found his ribs again, the same spot Dean had punched earlier. Something gave with a snap that Zeke felt more than heard. His breath hitched, vision blurring at the edges. Dean seized the opportunity, bringing his baton down hard. Zeke managed to partially block it, but the force still drove him to one knee. Riley moved in, his boot stomping down on Zeke's hand against the floor. Bones ground together as Riley twisted his heel. "Not so special now, are you?" Mason grabbed Zeke's jacket, pushing him face down. His knee dug into Zeke's back while Dean wrenched his arms behind him. Cold handcuffs bit into his wrists. Blood dripped from Zeke's split lip onto the diner floor, joining the scattered debris of overturned tables and broken dishes. His ribs screamed with each breath, and his crushed hand throbbed in time with his heartbeat. But despite the pain, despite being pinned under Mason's weight, a small smile crept across Zeke's face. "What's so funny, old man?" Dean demanded, twisting the handcuffs tighter. Zeke turned his head enough to meet Dean's eyes. Blood stained his teeth red, but his voice remained steady. "My phone. In my jacket pocket. Give it to me. You want to make a call?" Mason laughed, pressing his knee harder into Zeke's spine. "Who you gonna call, Grandpa? The retirement home? Give me my damn phone." The words carried the same quiet authority as before, unchanged by his prone position or the blood running down his chin. Riley studied him with cold eyes. Let him. Let's see who he thinks can help him now. Dean reached into Zeke's jacket pocket, pulling out an old flip phone. He dangled it in front of Zeke's face like a taunt. "Here's your phone, tough guy. Make your call." Aaliyah watched from behind the counter, tears streaming down her face but her jaw set in anger. Near the door, Hank stirred weakly, blood matting his gray hair. The diner had become a battlefield, tables overturned like barricades, broken glass glinting under fluorescent lights like shell casings. Through it all, Zeke's smile never wavered. Even handcuffed and bleeding, something in his eyes suggested the fight wasn't over, that it was, in fact, just beginning. The three officers had won the physical confrontation, but looking at Zeke's expression, it was hard to shake the feeling that they'd walked right into his trap. "Last chance," Zeke said calmly, despite the knee in his back. "Give me my damn phone." Dean thrust the flip phone at Zeke's face, his smirk dripping with contempt. "Make your pathetic call, old-timer. Maybe you can tell your grandkids how you got yourself arrested." With his hands cuffed behind his back, Zeke had to awkwardly maneuver his fingers to punch in the number. Each digit was pressed with deliberate precision, despite Mason's knee still grinding into his spine. The diner had fallen completely silent, save for the hum of fluorescent lights and Hank's labored breathing near the door. "You're wasting our time," Riley muttered, pacing near the counter where Aaliyah stood frozen, her order pad clutched to her chest like a shield. Zeke held the phone to his ear, his posture shifting subtly despite being pinned down. When he spoke, his voice carried a different weight, clipped, formal, carrying decades of authority. "This is Ezekiel Carter, retired Delta. Connect me to the Pentagon." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mason's knee eased slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. Dean's smirk widened, but something twitched in his jaw. "Old fool's lost his mind," Dean announced to the room, but his voice carried a hint of strain. "Thinks he's calling the Pentagon on a flip phone." Zeke continued speaking into the phone, calm and measured. "Authorization code Sierra 9 Delta 47. Priority channel." His eyes never left Dean's face, watching the officer's expression shift from mockery to the first traces of doubt. Riley had stopped pacing, his dead-eyed stare fixed on Zeke. The silence in the diner grew heavier, pressing down like a physical weight. Even the kitchen had gone quiet, the cook peering through the service window with wide eyes. "He's senile," Mason declared, but his knee had completely lifted from Zeke's back now. "Right, Dean? Just some crazy old man playing pretend." Before Dean could answer, his radio crackled to life. The sharp burst of static made all three officers jump. A stern voice cut through the white noise. "Dispatch to Officers Harlow, Trent, and Cole. Report your badge numbers and current location immediately." The color drained from Dean's face. Mason scrambled backward, releasing Zeke entirely. Riley's hand moved unconsciously toward his weapon. "I repeat." The voice on the radio grew harder. "All officers involved in the Carter's Diner incident, report your badge numbers now. This is a direct order from the chief." Zeke slowly pushed himself to a sitting position, ignoring the protest from his ribs. Blood still trickled from his split lip, but his eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. "You should answer them," he suggested mildly. "They don't like to be kept waiting." Dean fumbled with his radio, his earlier swagger evaporating. "This is Officer Harlow, badge 2847, currently at—" Another voice cut through the radio, this one carrying the unmistakable tone of federal authority. "All officers are to stand down immediately. Your badges and weapons are to be surrendered to the arriving state police. Do not attempt to leave the scene." Mason's face had gone gray. "Dean? What's happening?" His voice cracked like a teenager's. Riley stood perfectly still, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. His eyes darted between the radio and Zeke, calculations running behind his mask of indifference. "This is impossible," Dean sputtered, staring at his radio as if it had betrayed him. "You can't just call the Pentagon on a flip phone and—" "I spent 30 years running operations you'll never have clearance to know about," Zeke interrupted, his voice carrying across the diner. "Did you really think this jacket was just for show?" Aaliyah had moved closer, her hands shaking as she helped Zeke to his feet. Hank had managed to sit up, pressing a napkin to his bleeding temple, a grim smile of satisfaction on his face. The radio crackled again. "State Police ETA 3 minutes. All officers are suspended pending federal investigation." Dean's face twisted through a range of emotions, disbelief, rage, and finally, the first glimmer of fear. His hand tightened on his baton, knuckles white. "I wouldn't," Zeke warned quietly. "You've done enough damage to your career already." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Mason started pacing, running his hands through his hair. Riley remained motionless, but his breathing had become shallow and rapid. "You can't do this." Dean tried to sound threatening, but his voice shook. "You're just some old man." "We're police officers." "We're police officers," Zeke corrected. He straightened his jacket with dignity, despite his hands still being cuffed. "Your careers just ended." The 3 officers exchanged shocked looks as the reality of their situation sank in. The sirens were very close now, red and blue lights beginning to flash through the diner windows. Mason lunged forward suddenly, face contorted. "You son of a— Mason!" Dean grabbed his arm, stopping him. "Don't make it worse." Riley finally moved, backing away from Zeke as if he were something dangerous. His cold facade had cracked, showing the fear underneath. Through the windows, state police cruisers could be seen pulling into the parking lot, lights painting the inside of the diner in alternating crimson and sapphire. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the quiet street. Dean's radio crackled one final time. "All officers, prepare to surrender your weapons and badges. Federal agents are en route." This is not a negotiation. The state police swept into Carter's diner with practiced efficiency, their boots echoing on the linoleum floor. Dean, Mason, and Riley stood frozen as their badges and weapons were collected, their faces masks of disbelief and barely contained rage. Paramedics rushed to Zeke's side, gently removing his handcuffs and easing him onto a stretcher. His ribs screamed in protest, but he maintained his composure, watching the 3 officers being separated and questioned. Aaliyah hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "Sir, you've got at least 2 broken ribs," the paramedic said, pressing carefully around Zeke's torso. "We need to get you to County General." Hank stumbled over, still dabbing at his temple with a bloody napkin. "I'm riding with him," he declared, his voice brooking no argument. The paramedics nodded, helping both men into the ambulance. As they pulled away, Zeke caught a glimpse of men in dark suits entering the diner. They moved with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents, their presence sending ripples of tension through the gathered crowd. At the hospital, doctors confirmed 3 broken ribs, a sprained wrist, and various cuts and bruises. The split lip required 4 stitches. Hank received 6 stitches above his eye, refusing to leave Zeke's room even after treatment. "You know they're going to try to bury this," Hank muttered, settling into the visitor's chair. "Sheriff Langley's got his fingers in everything." Zeke nodded slowly, wincing at the pull of stitches. They always try to bury it, but they've never dealt with someone who knows their playbook. A nurse brought updates throughout the afternoon. The 3 officers had been formally suspended pending investigation. Federal liaisons had arrived from Washington, their presence sending shockwaves through the department. Dean had to be physically restrained when they took his badge, screaming threats that only dug his hole deeper. Aaliyah slipped into the room as evening approached, still wearing her diner uniform. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. "Sheriff Langley showed up right after you left. He's trying to control the story." "Tell me," Zeke said, shifting carefully in the hospital bed. "He ordered all our security footage erased, said it was procedure for an ongoing investigation." She twisted her apron in her hands. "Then he went table to table, telling everyone this was a local police matter, and we shouldn't talk to outside agencies." Hank snorted. "Bet that went over well." "People are scared," Aaliyah continued. "He wasn't asking, he was warning. Said anyone who causes unnecessary complications might find themselves dealing with code violations or traffic stops." "Classic intimidation," Zeke observed. "He's trying to lock down witnesses before the feds can build a case." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Through the door's window, they could see hospital security turning away a reporter. Rumors were already spreading through town like wildfire. "I heard the Pentagon sending investigators," one nurse whispered to another as they passed. "They're saying those officers were stealing federal money." "I heard the old man's some kind of spy," came the reply. "My cousin at the courthouse said the feds froze all the department's accounts." Aaliyah leaned closer to Zeke's bed. "People are talking about other things, too. Other times those officers hurt people. Stories that got buried." "They're not the only ones," Hank added grimly. "This goes deeper than 3 bad cops." The sunset painted the hospital room in deep orange when Sheriff Langley finally made his appearance. He filled the doorway in his tan uniform, county star gleaming on his chest. His smile was practiced, politician perfect. "Mr. Carter," he drawled, "I hope you're comfortable. Such an unfortunate incident." Zeke met his gaze steadily. "Nothing unfortunate about it, Sheriff. Your officers made choices. Now they face consequences." Langley's smile tightened. "Now, let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can resolve this internally. No need for outside involvement. The time for internal resolution passed when your men decided to beat a 90-year-old veteran," Hank spoke up, his voice hard, "and assault another veteran who tried to help. Emotions are running high," Langley said smoothly. "Best to let cooler heads prevail. I'd hate to see anyone suffer unnecessary complications while this gets sorted out." The threat was velvet-wrapped, but clear. Aaliyah stiffened, but kept her chin high. "You've made your position clear, Sheriff," Zeke replied calmly. "Now I suggest you leave before those federal agents down the hall decide to ask why you're attempting to intimidate witnesses." Langley's mask slipped for just a moment, showing the rage beneath. He adjusted his gun belt, a casual reminder of his authority. "This is still my county, Mr. Carter. Remember that." After he left, the room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Aaliyah's hands were shaking again. Hank stood by the window, watching the sheriff's cruiser pull away. "He'll try to bury it all," Aaliyah whispered. "He always does." "Not this time," Hank growled. "Too many eyes on it now." Zeke gazed out the window at the setting sun, its light catching on the town's water tower in the distance. The pain medication was wearing off, every breath sharp with broken ribs, but his mind was clear. Decades of Pentagon operations had taught him that the first strike was never the decisive one. This was just the opening move. "This isn't finished," he said quietly, watching shadows lengthen across the town he'd called home for so long. "It's only begun." The next day, Hank drove Zeke home from the hospital in his weathered pickup truck. Every bump in the road made Zeke's ribs ache, but he kept his face neutral. Decades of military discipline showing through. The morning sun cast long shadows across the small houses and neat yards of his neighborhood. Mrs. Jackson, his elderly neighbor, stood on her porch watering plants. When she saw Zeke getting out of the truck, she hurried over as fast as her arthritis would allow. "Lord have mercy, Mr. Carter. We've all been praying for you." "I'm fine, May," Zeke assured her, carefully straightening up with Hank's help. "Just some bruises." "Some bruises?" She clicked her tongue. "Those devils beat on a 90-year-old man. It ain't right." She lowered her voice. "But you showed them, didn't you? My grandson says you put Officer Dean right through a table." More neighbors emerged from their homes. Mr. Washington from across the street brought over a covered dish. "Sarah's famous chicken soup," he said proudly. "Good for healing." Young Marcus, who mowed Zeke's lawn, came running up. "Mr. Carter, man, you're like a superhero. Everyone's talking about how you fought those cops." But not all faces were friendly. The Petersons next door quickly went inside when they saw him. Down the street, Mrs. Miller pulled her children closer as they passed. Some folks crossed to the other side, avoiding eye contact. "They're scared," Hank muttered, helping Zeke up his front steps. "Langley's people have been making rounds, spreading their version." Inside Zeke's modest home, the phone was already ringing. Aaliyah had written down messages, reporters wanting comments, old military buddies offering support, and a few anonymous calls with nothing but heavy breathing. Zeke eased into his favorite armchair, surrounded by photos from his military days. Korea, special operations training, Pentagon briefing rooms, a lifetime of service captured in faded photographs. The TV droned in the background until a familiar voice made them both look up. Sheriff Langley stood at a podium outside the police station, his expression grave. "What we have here is an unfortunate situation being blown out of proportion," Langley said smoothly. "Our officers responded to reports of a disturbance. The suspect, Ezekiel Carter, became combative and resisted legitimate law enforcement commands." Hank swore, but Zeke held up a hand, listening intently. "While Mr. Carter's military service is appreciated," Langley continued, "we have uncovered disturbing inconsistencies in his record. There are questions about his claimed role in certain operations and reports of previous violent incidents. The camera panned to show Dean, Mason, and Riley standing behind the sheriff, now in civilian clothes, but looking righteous and wronged. Furthermore," Langley added, "Mr. Carter's age and possible cognitive decline raise serious concerns about his perception of events. We are investigating reports of previous erratic behavior and confrontations with authority figures." "That lying snake," Hank growled. "They're trying to paint you as some demented old man making trouble." Zeke's doorbell rang. Through the window, they could see reporters gathering on the lawn. Local news vans were parking along the street. "I'll get rid of them," Hank offered. But Zeke shook his head. "Let them look foolish out there. We're not playing their game." More neighbors came by throughout the afternoon. Some brought food or offered help. Others came to share stories about their own run-ins with the three officers, incidents that had been buried or ignored. "They broke my boy's arm last year," Mrs. Thompson confided, her hands trembling. "Said he was resisting. He was just walking home from school. Dean pulled my daughter over 5 times in 1 month," Reverend Mills added. "Kept asking her how she could afford her car." But with each supportive visitor came whispers of pressure from above. The bank was suddenly reviewing loans. Building inspectors were showing up at businesses. Traffic stops had doubled in certain neighborhoods. As evening fell, Hank reluctantly left to check on his own place. "They'll try to dig up dirt on anyone who stands with you," he warned. "Let them try," Zeke replied calmly. "Some of us stopped fearing shadows a long time ago." Alone in his kitchen, Zeke poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass, the same brand he'd carried in his pack in Korea. His ribs protested as he reached for the bottle, but he welcomed the pain. It kept his mind sharp. The TV was still running in the background. Langley's press conference was being rerun, along with carefully selected man-on-the-street interviews supporting the police version of events. The message was clear. Zeke was the troublemaker, the outsider threatening their ordered world. A reporter asked Langley about the Pentagon's involvement. The sheriff's practiced smile never wavered. "We welcome any review of our procedures. But this is a local matter, and it will be handled locally." Zeke sipped his bourbon, letting the familiar warmth spread through his chest. On his kitchen table lay decades of careful records: procurement forms, training schedules, equipment transfers, papers that told their own story, if you knew how to read them. "They think they can erase me," he muttered, touching his still swollen lip. "Let's see how they handle war on paper." The kitchen light cast a harsh glow as Zeke spread manila folders across his table. Each contained years of careful observations, notes scribbled during his time as a Pentagon analyst, documentation of patterns he'd noticed in this small southern town. His fingers, though stiff from age and the recent fight, moved with practiced efficiency. He arranged the papers like he used to arrange battlefield maps, creating a web of connections and vulnerabilities. "Sheriff Langley," he murmured, pulling out a thick folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, grant applications, and property records dating back 15 years. He placed a legal pad beside it and began writing in neat, precise letters. "Langley." The phone rang. Zeke checked the caller ID before answering. "Evening, General Thompson." "Zeke, you old war horse. Got your message. Pentagon's buzzing about what happened. You okay?" "Been worse," Zeke replied, touching his ribs. "Remember those procurement irregularities we discussed last year? The training equipment that kept disappearing? Time to pull that thread." Zeke moved another folder to the center. "I need a full audit. Training grants, equipment inventory, payroll records. Everything from the last 5 years. That'll set off alarms all the way up the chain," Thompson warned. "Good. While they're scrambling, check the mayor's pet project, that new tactical training facility. $10 million in federal funds, but I've never seen more than 2 patrol cars there." Zeke heard papers rustling on the other end. "Jesus, Zeke. You've been building this case for years, haven't you? Since I noticed Officer Dean driving a $70,000 truck on a $40,000 salary." Zeke pulled out another folder labeled Dean. "Check his supervisor logs against the training records. He claims overtime for courses that never happened." "What about the prosecutor?" "James Morrison." Zeke opened a thinner file. "His office signs off on all the equipment transfers. His signature's on requisition, forms for gear that never arrived. Cross-reference that with his beach house mortgage." He could hear Thompson typing. "This goes deeper than 3 cops roughing you up, doesn't it? They're just the visible cancer. Langley's the tumor at the core." Zeke pulled out a map of the county, marked with red circles. "Every circle is a training site that got federal money. Check how many actually exist. This could take weeks to unravel. They're counting on that. But start with last year's tactical gear grant. $300,000 for riot equipment that's not in any inventory." Zeke worked methodically through the night, his kitchen becoming a war room. He mapped connections on his walls with thumbtacks and string, like tracking enemy movements. The mayor's name connected to construction contracts. The prosecutor linked to missing evidence. Officers tied to unexplained deposits. At midnight, his doorbell rang. Zeke moved cautiously to the window, but it was only Aaliyah from the diner, carrying coffee and sandwiches. "Thought you might need fuel," she said, setting them down. Her eyes widened at the wall of evidence. "What is all this?" "Artillery," Zeke replied, accepting a coffee. "Langley built his empire on federal money. Time to show him how the federal government handles fraud." He pointed to a stack of papers. "These are equipment transfer forms. Notice anything strange?" Aaliyah studied them. "The signatures, they're different on each one, but they're supposed to be from the same person." "Good eye. Someone's been forging approvals. Probably Morrison's assistant. She suddenly got a new car last spring." The phone rang again. Thompson's voice was excited. "Zeke, you beautiful bastard. The tactical facility? It's registered as a full-time training center, getting funding for 30 officers. How many officers actually train there?" "According to the logbooks, none in the last 6 months." Zeke made another note. "Where's the money going?" "Working on it. But I've flagged everything for review. By morning, every federal grant in that county will be frozen pending investigation." "They'll try to bury it," Zeke warned. "Langley's got friends in the state capitol." "Not anymore. State Police Internal Affairs just opened their own investigation. Seems somebody sent them some interesting photos of our friend the sheriff." Zeke allowed himself a small smile. Amazing what people keep in safety deposit boxes. He worked until dawn, mapping every connection, every vulnerability. His military training took over. Identify the enemy's supply lines, cut off their resources, isolate the command structure. Aaliyah stayed, helping organize files and making fresh coffee. Around 5 a.m., she gasped at a document. This shows Officer Dean was supposedly in training in Atlanta the same day he broke up that church fundraiser. "Keep digging," Zeke encouraged. "Every contradiction is ammunition." The morning sun was rising when Thompson called a final time. "It's done. Full federal audit team arrives Monday. State police will secure all records today. County accounts are locked down." Zeke looked at his wall of evidence, now a complex web of corruption and money trails. At the center was Langley's photo from the local paper, showing him at a charity golf tournament, smugly holding an oversized check. With a steady hand, Zeke picked up a red marker. He drew a careful circle around Langley's face, then crossed it with an X like targeting coordinates. "Target," he said quietly, stepping back to survey his work. Years of observation, countless hours of analysis, all focused on this moment. Like planning any military operation, the key was patience and precision. He'd learned in Korea that the biggest targets required the most careful approach. Langley had built his fortress on papers and procedures. Now those same papers would become the weapons that brought him down. The sun had fully risen when Aaliyah returned from making another coffee run. She found Zeke still at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers, and looking exhausted, but determined. "You need to rest," she said, setting down a fresh cup beside him. "Can't. Not yet." Zeke rubbed his eyes. "There's too much here. Every file opens up 3 more connections." Aaliyah pulled up a chair. "Then let me help more. I've worked at that diner for 6 years. I've seen things, heard conversations. Those officers, they get loose-lipped after a few drinks." Zeke looked up, studying her face. "You understand helping me could be dangerous? Langley doesn't play gentle. I stopped being scared of bullies a long time ago." Aaliyah's voice was firm. "My little brother wants to be a cop someday. But not in a department like this. Not under men like Langley." A knock at the door made them both tense. Zeke reached for his cane, but relaxed when he heard Hank's gruff voice. "It's me, old-timer." The retired mechanic looked rough. A purple bruise spread across his temple where the pistol had struck him, but his eyes were clear and angry. "Heard you were building a case," Hank said, easing himself into a chair. "I want in. Your head." Is fine. Had worse in Nam. Hank leaned forward. Listen, I've been fixing police cruisers under the table for years. They pay cash, no paperwork. But the parts they bring me? Brand new, straight from federal inventory. They're selling equipment and pocketing the money. Zeke grabbed a legal pad. Can you document dates? Serial numbers? Better. Hank reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. I write everything down. Old habit from the service. Got 3 years of parts that shouldn't exist according to their official inventory. Aaliyah smiled. The mechanics were always Dean's blind spot. He thought you were just another good old boy. That's not all, a new voice said from the doorway. They turned to see Monique Thompson, the retired county records clerk. She stood nervously, clutching a thick manila envelope. Door was open, she explained. I've been watching all this for years. Couldn't sleep last night, thinking about what happened to you, Mr. Carter. Zeke gestured to an empty chair. Come in, Mrs. Thompson. Tell me what you know. Monique sat, her hands shaking slightly as she opened the envelope. I kept copies. They told me to shred the originals, but I couldn't. Not all of them. She spread out documents across the table. Grant applications with different numbers than what was submitted. Training rosters for classes that never happened. Equipment transfers to departments that don't exist. Why come forward now? Zeke asked gently. Because I helped build this house of cards. Monique's voice cracked. For 20 years, I processed their paperwork, saw the patterns, said nothing. My silence helped them steal millions, meant to protect this community. Aaliyah put a hand on the older woman's shoulder. You're doing the right thing now. Langley's going to fight back hard, Hank warned. He's got too much to lose. Let him, Zeke said, adding Monique's documents to his wall of evidence. The harder he fights, the more desperate he'll look. And desperate men make mistakes. They worked through the morning, 4 unlikely allies building an ironclad case. Hank's maintenance records proved equipment theft. Monique's saved documents showed systematic fraud. Aaliyah remembered dates, conversations, suspicious meetings she'd witnessed at the diner. Look at this, Aaliyah said, comparing documents. The training facility reported full classes the same week the diner's security camera caught half the department at Mason's birthday party. And here, Hank pointed to an inventory list, tactical gear they claimed was destroyed in training. I fixed the same equipment 2 months later for their SWAT team. Monique traced a pattern of signatures. Morrison signs everything without reading. But his assistant, she knows. She's the one who told me which files to lose over the years. The sound of breaking glass shattered their concentration. Aaliyah screamed as a brick crashed through Zeke's front window, sending shards flying across the room. Hank moved faster than his injuries should have allowed, pulling her away from the spray of glass. Zeke was already moving, his cane forgotten as he rushed to the window. The street was empty, except for a black SUV peeling away. No plates visible. Anyone hurt? He demanded, scanning the room. We're okay, Hank said, helping Monique up from where she'd ducked under the table. Aaliyah walked to the brick, hands trembling. A note was wrapped around it, held by a rubber band. She slipped it off and read it aloud. Back off or die. The threat hung in the air, making the morning sun seem suddenly colder. But instead of fear, Aaliyah felt something harder crystallize in her chest. She turned to Zeke, chin raised. They think they can scare us away, she said. They don't know what scared feels like. My daddy had crosses burned on his lawn for registering voters. Mama got fired for reporting harassment at the factory. We don't scare easy in my family. They're playing their hand early, Hank observed, examining the brick. Means we're already making them nervous. Monique gathered the scattered papers with determined precision. I spent 20 years watching them bully this town. Not anymore. Zeke studied his allies, a young waitress with fire in her eyes, a veteran who wouldn't back down, a clerk finding her courage at last. They weren't soldiers or politicians. They were simply people who'd had enough. "Get your phones out," he said. "Document everything. That brick is evidence now. Every threat they make is another nail in their coffin." Monique returned an hour later, her hands full with a thick stack of manila folders. Her eyes darted nervously as she laid them on Zeke's kitchen table. "These are copies of everything I could find," she whispered, though they were alone in the house. Grant applications, equipment transfers, training records, all of it doctored. Zeke opened the first folder, his weathered fingers moving methodically through the papers. 20 years of systematic fraud lay exposed in columns of numbers and official signatures. Training sessions billed but never held. Equipment purchased with federal money, then lost, only to reappear in private hands. Double billing for overtime during supposed emergency drills. "Look at this one," Monique said, pointing to a particular form. "They reported full SWAT training for 30 officers last summer. But I remember that week. Half the force was at the county fair providing security. The training never happened." "How much?" Zeke asked quietly. "Just for that fake training? $40,000? Monique's voice shook. "Multiply that by dozens of phantom sessions over the years. Add in the equipment theft, the padded overtime, the ghost employees on payroll." She swallowed hard. "Millions, Mr. Carter. They've stolen millions." Zeke nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He reached for his phone. Not the old flip phone, but a secure line his Pentagon contact had sent. He photographed each document methodically, building an electronic record that couldn't be destroyed. "They'll know it was me," Monique said, wringing her hands. "I was the only one with access to these archives." "You're under federal protection now," Zeke assured her. "The moment these files hit Washington, you become a protected witness." He paused, looking at her directly. "Are you sure about this?" Monique straightened her spine. "My husband died thinking I was a coward, that I just went along to keep my pension. He was right. But not anymore." Zeke sent the files with a simple message. "Evidence secured. Witness willing to testify." The response came within hours. 3 unmarked cars rolled into town the next morning, carrying federal auditors with badges that made Sheriff Langley's face turn pale. They set up in a conference room at the courthouse, requesting files with quiet authority that couldn't be ignored. From his front porch, Zeke watched Dean, Mason, and Riley gather in the parking lot of the sheriff's office. Even from a distance, their body language screamed panic. Dean jabbed his finger at Mason's chest. Riley paced like a caged animal. "They're starting to crack," Hank observed, sitting beside Zeke with an ice pack against his bruised temple. "Fear does that," Zeke replied. "They're used to being the ones who make others afraid. Tables have turned." They watched as the argument between the officers escalated. Mason shoved Dean, who stumbled backward into Riley. For a moment, it looked like the 3 might come to blows. Then Sheriff Langley's voice boomed across the lot, and they scattered like guilty schoolboys. Aaliyah brought them fresh coffee, her steps quick but determined. Word spreading through town. "The feds are going through everything. Payroll, equipment logs, training records. They're even interviewing janitors about which officers worked overtime shifts." "Good," Zeke said. "Let them feel the net tightening." The screen door creaked, and Monique hurried onto the porch. "They're looking for the original files now. Langley's secretary is in tears. She can't explain why half the grant documentation is missing." "Because you have it," Hank said with a grim smile. "They don't know that yet." Monique managed a shaky laugh. 20 years of being invisible. And now, I'm their worst nightmare. The afternoon sun was setting when they heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Sheriff Langley's personal truck pulled up in front of Zeke's house. The man himself stepped out, still wearing his pressed uniform and polished badge. but his face was mottled with rage. "You're making a mistake, Carter," Langley called from the yard. His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon. "This is a small town. Accidents happen, cars go off roads, houses catch fire, people disappear." Zeke rose slowly, leaving his cane propped against the porch rail. "That sounded like a threat, Sheriff. Just stating facts." Langley's smile was cold. "You really want to spend your last years fighting a war you can't win? Making enemies of people who run this town? Run it into the ground, you mean?" Zeke replied evenly. "Stealing from your own department. Using federal money meant to protect people to line your pockets instead. You can't prove anything. The auditors seem to think differently." Zeke took a step forward. "Tell me something, Sheriff. When you were threatening witnesses and burning files, did you think about the paper trail? Every deleted document, every lost record, it all leaves traces. And I spent 30 years in the Pentagon following traces just like these." Langley's face darkened. "You're one old man. I've got the whole system behind me." "Had," Zeke corrected. "Past tense. Your officers are already turning on each other. Your clerk is talking to the feds. Your secretary is crying over missing files. Your system is falling apart." "I'll destroy you," Langley snarled, dropping all pretense. "I'll bury you so deep. I buried stronger men than you." Zeke's voice cut through the evening air like steel. "Men who thought a uniform made them untouchable. Men who confused power with right. They're all gone now, and I'm still here." Langley's hand tightened on his weapon, but Zeke didn't flinch. Behind him, Hank stood ready. Aaliyah and Monique watched from the doorway, witnesses to every word. "Think carefully about your next move, Sheriff," Zeke said quietly. "The feds are watching, the town is watching, and I'm watching." The morning light crept through Zeke's kitchen window as his phone rang. He recognized Aaliyah's number. "Mr. Carter." Her voice cracked. "It's Monique. They found her." Zeke's hand tightened on the receiver. "Where?" "Her apartment. They're saying—" Aaliyah choked back a sob. "They're saying it was an overdose, pills. But Mr. Carter, Monique never took anything stronger than aspirin. Never." Zeke closed his eyes, grief and rage warring in his chest. "I'm on my way." Yellow police tape crossed Monique's front door. 2 patrol cars idled outside, officers pointedly ignoring Zeke as he approached. The county coroner's van was already pulling away. "You can't go in there," a young officer said, stepping forward. "Active investigation." "Like hell I can't." Zeke moved past him with surprising speed for a 90-year-old man. The officer grabbed his arm, but Zeke twisted free with practiced ease. "Touch me again, son, and you'll learn why Delta Force operators don't retire. They just get more dangerous." Inside, the apartment told its own story. Too neat, too clean. Someone had gone through methodically, probably before calling it in. The manila folders, copies of the ones she'd given him, were gone. Her computer was missing. Even her personal notebooks had vanished. In the kitchen, a prescription bottle lay on its side, pills scattered across the counter. The label was crisp, new. No pharmacist's creases or wear from being carried in a purse. "Convenient," Zeke muttered. Detective Ross stood in the bedroom doorway, his face professionally blank. "Tragic situation, Mr. Carter. Lady her age, living alone, depression sets in." "Save it," Zeke snapped. "You know damn well this wasn't suicide." "Medical examiner will make that determination." Ross's voice hardened. "Meanwhile, you should watch yourself. Getting old can be dangerous. Falls, accidents, confusion about medication." The threat hung in the air between them. Zeke stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've seen better staged scenes in war zones. You tell your boss, He just made this personal. Back home, Zeke's phone rang again. This time, it was Hank's wife, Mary. "They arrested him," she cried. "Said he assaulted an officer last night outside the VFW hall." "But he was home with me, Zeke. We were watching Wheel of Fortune." "Witness?" Zeke asked sharply. "Officer Dean claims Hank jumped him in the parking lot." Got 2 other cops backing his story. Zeke's jaw clenched. "I'll call my lawyer contact. Don't let him talk to anyone else." Before he could dial, Aaliyah burst through his front door, tears streaming down her face. Her uniform was wrinkled, hair disheveled. "They're firing me," she gasped. "The health inspector showed up this morning, said he found violations that could shut down the diner. Owner called me in, said he's sorry, but he can't risk his business over one waitress." Zeke guided her to a chair. "Did they threaten you directly?" "The inspector." Aaliyah wiped her eyes. "He said accidents happen in commercial kitchens. Hot grease, sharp knives. Said it would be a shame if I got hurt, because I was distracted by outside concerns." The pieces fell into place. Monique silenced. Hank framed. Aaliyah threatened. They were isolating him, cutting off his support, destroying the people who dared stand with him. Zeke moved to his bedroom, opened his closet. Inside, a shadow box held his medals: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Distinguished Service Cross. Beneath them lay a folded American flag. "They think this will stop me," he whispered to the medals. "Think killing an innocent woman and threatening my friends will make me back down." His fingers traced the flag's stripes. "They don't understand what these stand for. Don't understand what I've survived." The phone rang again. The Pentagon contact. "Zeke, we've got trouble. Local judge just sealed the audit records. State police are slow-walking the investigation. Someone's pulling strings way above county level." "They killed my witness," Zeke said flatly. A long pause. "Jesus, you sure?" "Staged overdose. Too clean, too convenient. They're taking out everyone who helped me. Watch your back, old friend. This goes deeper than we thought." Zeke hung up and sank into his armchair. On the wall, photos spanned his life. Korea, Delta Force training, Pentagon ceremonies, young men who'd died under his command, battles fought for a flag that promised justice. His hand shook, not with age, but with fury. They'd killed Monique, a grandmother who only wanted to do right, framed Hank, who'd fought for his country, threatened Aaliyah, barely starting her life. The sun set outside his window, casting long shadows across the floor. In the distance, a police siren wailed. Someone testing his resolve, maybe. Seeing if he'd run. Zeke stood, walked to his desk. The computer hummed as he logged into encrypted accounts he hadn't touched in years. Passwords that opened doors to classified archives. Contact numbers for people who owed him favors. Serious favors. The kind that could destroy careers or expose buried secrets. "They want war," he whispered to his medals, to the memories of men who'd died for justice. "I'll give them hell." He began to type, his fingers steady now. This wasn't just about police brutality anymore. This was about power and corruption that ran deep enough to murder witnesses and threaten innocents. They thought age made him vulnerable. They'd learn what experience really meant. The medals gleamed in the fading light, silent witnesses to a soldier's promise. Monique's death would not be in vain. Hank would not rot in jail. Aaliyah would not lose her future. This was war now, and Ezekiel Carter had never lost a war. Night had fallen when Aaliyah's gentle knock echoed through Zeke's house. He opened the door to find her shivering, not from cold, but from fear. "I went back to Monique's building," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "The manager let me in. Said I could pack up her personal things for the family." She pulled an envelope from her purse, sealed with clear tape, Monique's neat handwriting across the front. For Zeke Carter, in case. Zeke's hands trembled slightly as he guided Aaliyah inside, away from watching eyes. The kitchen light cast a warm glow as they sat at his worn oak table. "Did anyone follow you?" he asked, scanning the darkness through his window. "I took 3 different buses, doubled back twice." Aaliyah's voice strengthened with pride. "Just like you taught me." Zeke nodded approval, then carefully opened the envelope. Inside, he found a memo dated 8 years ago. The paper yellowed, but the type still sharp. The letterhead bore the state auditor's seal. "My God," he breathed, reading. "Monique, you brilliant woman." The memo detailed a systematic fraud scheme. Training grants meant for officer education had been diverted into private accounts. Equipment funds disappeared into shell companies. Federal money earmarked for community policing programs vanished into offshore transfers. Names jumped from the pages. Sheriff Langley, Dean, Mason, Riley. A web of corruption spanning years, documented in merciless detail by a state auditor who'd tried to expose it. "Look at the signature block," Aaliyah pointed. The auditor died in a car crash 2 weeks after writing this. "Single vehicle accident?" Zeke asked grimly. "How did you know?" "Same playbook they used on Monique. Make it look clean, natural. No questions asked." Zeke spread the papers across his table. Bank records, transfer logs, equipment inventories with glaring discrepancies. Monique had spent years quietly copying everything that crossed her desk, building a paper trail. "She knew they might come for her," Aaliyah whispered. "That's why she made copies, hid them where they wouldn't look." "Smart woman." Zeke's voice cracked slightly. "Too smart to take pills." He studied a particularly damning page. A training invoice for $50,000 with only Dean's signature as verification. The same day, an identical amount had been withdrawn from a shadow account, split 5 ways. "This is it," he said. "This is what gets them. Not viral videos or public outrage. Paper, numbers, money trails they can't erase." Aaliyah leaned forward. "What do? We get it to people who can act on it. People they can't touch." Zeke reached for his phone, then paused. "But first, you need to disappear for a few days." "I'm not running." "Not running. Protecting the evidence." He pulled out a business card. "This is a safe house in Montgomery. Former Delta operator runs it. Tell him I sent you. Stay there until I call." "But, Aaliyah," his voice gentled. "They killed Monique over these papers. I won't lose anyone else. Please." She reluctantly took the card. "What about you?" "I'm going to make a call. Then I'm going to sit right here and wait. Let them come if they're stupid enough." After she left, Zeke dialed Washington. Not his usual Pentagon contact. This number went higher. Much higher. "This is Carter," he said when the line connected. "Authorization code Delta 79 Echo. I need the Marshal Service." Quietly. He explained about the memo, the fraud, the murder. His contact listened in silence. "The Veterans Memorial Parade is Saturday," Zeke finished. "Every corrupt badge in 3 counties will be there, preening for the cameras. How do you want to play it? Send your marshals in as parade security. Regular uniforms, nothing flashy. Let them blend with the crowd. When I give the signal, we take them all at once. No warning, no chance to run." A pause. "You're sure about the evidence?" "Got enough paper to bury them. Just need badges with federal authority to serve it." "Done. Team will contact you tomorrow with details." The line clicked dead. Zeke sat back, studying Monique's careful documentation. In death, she'd given them everything needed to bring down the corrupt machine that killed her. All those years of quiet copying, quiet watching, quiet courage. He made himself coffee, strong and black. The night ahead would be long. They might come for him. might try to silence him like they had Monique. Let them come. A lifetime of combat had taught him patience. The memo lay on his table, damning in its detail. Numbers didn't lie. Money always left a trail. Corrupt men got sloppy, thinking they were untouchable. Saturday, they'd learn different. Saturday, justice would wear a federal badge and carry Monique's truth. Outside, a car cruised past his house, headlights off. Zeke sipped his coffee, unworried. The porch light caught his service medals, making them gleam like promises kept. Let them watch. Let them worry. The wheels were in motion now, and no amount of local muscle could stop federal law once it started rolling. In the distance, a dog barked at shadows. Zeke settled deeper into his chair. Monique's evidence spread before him like battle plans. The marshals were coming. Justice was coming. All he had to do was stay alive until Saturday. Saturday dawned crisp and clear. American flags lined Main Street, snapping in the autumn breeze. Veterans from 3 counties gathered in the town square, medals gleaming on pressed uniforms. The memorial statue at the center wore fresh polish, its bronze soldier forever at attention. Zeke adjusted his olive bomber jacket in the mirror, fingers tracing the worn U.S. flag patch. His reflection showed every one of his 90 years, but his eyes burned with purpose. The paper in his pocket, Monique's evidence, felt like fire against his heart. He arrived early, watching the crowd build from a bench near the stage. Families spread blankets on the grass. Children waved mini flags. A high school band warmed up with patriotic tunes that echoed off the courthouse walls. Sheriff Langley arrived in full-dress uniform, brass buttons catching the morning sun. He glad-handed the mayor, posed for photos, played the proud public servant. Behind him, Dean, Mason, and Riley swaggered through the crowd in their blues, badges polished to mirror shine. "Look at them," Aaliyah whispered, appearing at Zeke's side. She'd returned from Montgomery that morning, determined to witness justice. Acting like nothing happened. Pride before the fall, Zeke murmured. His eyes tracked movement in the crowd. Men in parade security uniforms who moved with too much precision to be local cops. The marshals were in position. Dean spotted Zeke and nudged Mason, smirking. They thought they'd won. Thought the old man was neutralized. Riley's dead-eyed stare promised future violence once the crowds dispersed. The ceremony began with prayers and pledges. A congressman gave a speech about sacrifice and duty that made Zeke's jaw clench. These men talked about honor while protecting corruption. When Sheriff Langley took the podium, his voice boomed with false sincerity. Today we honor our heroes, those who defended American values. Zeke's turn came midway through the program. He rose slowly, leaning on his cane, feeling every bruise those cops had given him. The crowd murmured, some with respect, others with tension. They knew his name now, knew what had happened at the diner. He took the stage one careful step at a time. The microphone hummed as he adjusted it. "My name is Ezekiel Carter," he began, voice steady and strong. "I served with the 7th Infantry Division in Korea. Later, I worked intelligence at the Pentagon. I've spent my life defending American values." In the crowd, Dean rolled his eyes. Mason whispered something that made Riley smirk. "But today, I'm not here to talk about foreign enemies." Zeke pulled Monique's papers from his jacket. "I'm here to talk about enemies of justice right here at home." Sheriff Langley stiffened. Dean's hand moved toward his gun. 8 years ago, a state auditor documented systematic theft of federal funds by members of our police department. Zeke held up the memo. Training grants diverted to private accounts. Equipment money laundered through shell companies. Hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen from taxpayers. The crowd stirred. Phones came out, recording. That auditor died in a suspicious crash. Last week, A county clerk named Monique Thompson was murdered for having copies of these records. Zeke's voice carried across the square. She died protecting the truth about corrupt men who dishonor their badges. That's enough! Sheriff Langley strode toward the stage. This is slander. These are facts, Zeke countered. Bank records, transfer logs, signatures on fraudulent documents. Your signatures, Sheriff, along with Officers Dean, Mason, and Riley. The three cops started pushing through the crowd, but uniformed figures moved to block their path, the marshals dropping their parade security cover. This evidence is already with federal authorities, Zeke continued. The same authorities who are here now to arrest those responsible. Sheriff Langley's face twisted with rage as he stormed toward the stage, his polished boots thundering on the wooden steps. Get this senile old man out of here, he bellowed, reaching for Zeke's arm. The crowd drew a collective breath. Parents pulled children closer. Veterans straightened in their seats, hands clenching. You're done, Carter, Langley spat. Officers, remove him! Dean, Mason, and Riley muscled through the stunned onlookers, their faces dark with malice. Mason cracked his knuckles, Riley's dead eyes fixed on Zeke, and Dean's hand stayed near his weapon. Zeke's cane clattered to the stage floor. Despite his 90 years, his stance shifted with practiced ease into a fighter's croil. His weathered hands rose in loose fists, and a dangerous calm settled over his features. Last chance to surrender peacefully, Zeke said quietly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. Mason lunged first, young and cocky, throwing a wild haymaker. Zeke stepped inside the punch with surprising speed. His knee shot up, catching Mason dead center in the solar plexus. The impact lifted Mason off his feet, and he crumpled, gasping like a landed fish. Riley attacked from the side, trying to grapple. But Zeke pivoted, his elbow smashing into Riley's jaw with a sickening crack. Decades of Delta Force training flowed through his movements. Riley staggered backward, blood streaming from his split lip, eyes glazed. My God, someone whispered. Phones recorded frantically. The high school band had stopped playing, instruments forgotten in their hands. Dean circled more cautiously, having seen his partners dispatched. You're still just an old man, he growled, feinting left. Zeke didn't bite. He waited, balanced despite his age, letting Dean come to him. When Dean finally charged, Zeke moved like flowing water. He slipped the punch, stepped behind Dean, and locked his arm around the officer's throat in a textbook chokehold. Dean thrashed, but Zeke's grip was iron. The crowd watched in amazement as the 90-year-old veteran controlled the much younger man with practiced ease. This is what real training looks like, Zeke said calmly, as Dean's struggles weakened. Not the fake sessions you've been billing the government for. Langley reached for his sidearm, but a stern voice cut through the tension. Federal agents, hands where we can see them. The U.S. Marshals moved with precision, their previously concealed weapons now drawn. They converged on the stage from multiple directions, their true identities revealed. Sheriff Langley Price, the lead marshal announced, pulling out an official document. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, misappropriation of federal funds, and obstruction of justice. Another marshal approached Dean, who was still gasping from Zeke's chokehold. Officer Dean Harlow, you're under arrest for assault, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The handcuffs clicked loudly in the quiet square as they were fastened around Langley's wrists. The sheriff's face had gone from red to pale, his authority crumbling before the town's eyes. Mason tried to crawl away but was quickly secured. Riley spat blood and cursed as he was cuffed. Dean could only wheeze as the marshals read him his rights. The crowd's shock transformed into anger. Years of witnessed injustices and silent fears found voice. "They broke my son's arm last year," someone shouted. "They threatened my business," called another. "Justice for Monique." Aaliyah's voice rang clear above the others. Hank, his face still bearing bruises from the diner assault, pushed through the crowd. He climbed the stage steps and stood beside Zeke, two veterans united against corruption. The marshals began reciting the federal warrants, their voices carrying across the square. Multiple counts of misappropriation of federal funds, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying training records, improper use of equipment grants. Each charge drew more gasps and angry murmurs from the crowd. The evidence was damning, the dollar amounts staggering. "Get them out of here!" someone yelled as the marshals led the handcuffed officers toward waiting vehicles. Dean struggled against his restraints, twisting to glare at Zeke. "This isn't over, old man." "It is for you," Zeke replied steadily, standing tall despite the ache in his bones. A trickle of blood ran from a fresh cut on his knuckles, but his eyes were clear and proud. Mason stumbled as he was led past, no longer the swaggering bully. Riley kept his head down, the fight completely drained from him. Sheriff Langley tried to maintain his dignity, but couldn't hide his trembling hands. The crowd's jeers followed them across the square. Years of intimidation transformed into cathartic release, as the townspeople watched their tormentors reduced to common criminals. "This is what justice looks like," Zeke called out, his voice strong despite the morning's exertion. Not behind closed doors, not in secret meetings, but here in the light of day. Aaliyah appeared with his cane, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Mr. Carter. You really did it." Zeke took the cane, drew himself up straight, and watched as the corrupt officers were loaded into separate vehicles. His body ached from the fight, but his spirit soared. The truth had finally broken through, and not even badges could hide from it anymore. The memorial statue's shadow stretched across the square as justice, long delayed, was finally served. 2 weeks after the arrests, morning sunlight streamed through the freshly cleaned windows of Carter's Corner. The diner's new sign gleamed against the red brick, its gold letters catching the early rays. Inside, the aroma of coffee and bacon filled the air, mixed with the sweet scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. Aaliyah moved between tables with practiced grace, her manager's badge pinned proudly to her apron. She'd transformed the space, hanging black and white photographs that captured the town's full history. Not just the sanitized version. Local artists had contributed paintings that celebrated diversity, and the breakfast counter now hosted an ever-changing display of children's artwork from the nearby elementary school. Zeke sat in his usual booth, which now bore a small brass plate. "Reserved for Mr. Carter." His coffee cup steamed before him, and his familiar olive bomber jacket hung on the coat rack by the door. His weathered hands traced the edge of the morning paper, which carried yet another update on the corruption case. The headline read, "Former officers plead guilty in federal grant fraud case." "More coffee, Mr. Carter?" Aaliyah asked, pot already tilting. "Always," he smiled, watching through the window as children played in the small park across the street. Black and white kids chased each other, their laughter carrying through the glass. No parents pulled their children away from each other. No suspicious glances darkened the morning. The new memorial plaque caught the light near the entrance. Bronze letters spelled out, "In honor of those who stood for justice." Below were 3 names, Ezekiel Carter, Monique Thompson, and Henry Hank Miller. Underneath was inscribed, "Truth fears no questions." Hank limped in, his cane tapping against the freshly tiled floor. The beating he'd taken had left him with a permanent reminder, but his spine was straight, and his eyes were clear. He slid into the booth across from Zeke, nodding at the regulars who called out greetings. "Morning, brother," Hank said, accepting the coffee Aaliyah immediately brought over. Saw the news about Dean and Mason taking the plea deal. 20 years each, Zeke confirmed, folding the paper. Riley turned state's evidence. Langley goes to trial next month. The bell above the door chimed as more customers entered. The diner had become busier than ever, drawing people from all parts of town. The old barriers were slowly crumbling, conversation by conversation, meal by meal. Miss Monique would have loved to see this, Aaliyah said softly, refreshing their cups. Her eyes drifted to the photo of Monique that held pride of place near the register, the retired clerk smiling on her last day of work, before corruption had claimed her life. She sees it, Zeke said firmly. Her sacrifice helped make it possible. A young black boy rushed up to their booth, homework paper in hand. Mr. Carter, would you help me with my history project? It's about the Korean War. Zeke's face softened. Pull up a chair, young man. What do you want to know? As Zeke began explaining military history in terms a child could understand, more kids gathered around. Parents watched with approval, and soon the booth became an impromptu classroom. The morning light shifted, casting long shadows across the diner's floor. The breakfast rush faded into the quiet lull before lunch. Aaliyah's staff cleaned tables and restocked supplies, their movements choreographed by weeks of working together. A distinguished-looking man in a crisp suit entered, carrying a leather briefcase. His bearing marked him as military, though he wore no uniform. He waited patiently while Zeke finished his story for the children, then approached the booth. Mr. Carter, he said formally, extending his hand. Colonel James Richardson, Pentagon Liaison Office. May I join you? Hank excused himself with a knowing look, leaving Zeke and the colonel alone in the booth. Aaliyah brought fresh coffee without being asked. The Department of Defense wanted me to personally thank you, Richardson said quietly. Your actions exposed a network of grant fraud that extended far beyond this town. We've identified similar schemes in 3 other states. Zeke sipped his coffee, watching a new group of children playing outside. A little white girl shared her jump rope with 2 black boys, their parents chatting easily on a nearby bench. The money was never the point, Zeke replied. It was about what the corruption did to people, how it poisoned everything it touched. Richardson nodded. Nevertheless, your service to your country didn't end with your retirement. You've helped restore integrity to systems meant to protect and serve. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew an envelope. The secretary wanted you to have this, a commendation for continuing to uphold your oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Zeke accepted the envelope, but didn't open it. His eyes remained on the scene outside, where the jumping children had attracted more playmates. The group now included kids of every shade, laughing and taking turns without hesitation. You know what I see out there, Colonel? Zeke asked softly. What's that, sir? The future we fought for. The one worth every scar, every struggle, every sacrifice. He turned to face Richardson, his gaze steady and clear. Justice isn't free, but it's worth every fight. The colonel stood and offered a crisp salute, which Zeke returned from his seated position. Around them, Carter's corner hummed with life and possibility. The morning sun caught the memorial plaque, making the names shine like beacons in the renewed light of day. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.